There are truths that can only be heard when the world around you falls silent. Over the next 2 hours, let yourself drift into the stories of a map to a place that shouldn't exist, the silent music box that played again, and why no one ever sat on that lonely bench. 3 quiet stories gently woven together. Welcome to Night Feather Sleep Stories.
There was a book on the lowest shelf of the bookcase, a dark, hard-cover volume with no title visible on its spine. It sat there, squeezed between other books that were consulted more often, and gathered a fine layer of dust, patiently laid down by time. That afternoon, a soft light streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A quiet impulse, for no apparent reason, led a hand to that forgotten book. The fingers felt the rough texture of the old cloth cover and the chill of paper that hadn't seen daylight in many years. Maybe this is just another one of those quiet stories made to help you relax. And sometimes that's all we really need. As it was pulled free, the book felt heavier than it looked. A small, dry sound, like a brittle leaf snapping, echoed in the quiet room. Something slid from between the pages and fell to the wooden floor. It wasn't a leaf, nor a bookmark. It was a small square of yellowed paper, folded over on itself again and again until it was thick and compact. It lay there on the floor, a small anomaly, a promise of something that had been tucked away and forgotten. The imbalance was clear, an object out of place, a sleeping secret that had just been awakened. The curiosity that arose wasn't restless, but calm and methodical. A silent question hung in the air. What was this, and why was it kept so carefully inside this anonymous book? Kneeling on the wooden floor, fingers touched the paper. It was brittle, fragile. The folds were deep creases set by decades of pressure between the pages. Unfolding it by force would surely tear it, turning whatever it was into a puzzle of useless fragments. The decision formed naturally, definitively, like water finding its path. This small object needed care. It needed to be restored with the same patience with which time had aged it. The promise of transformation became clear in that moment. That small square of paper, fragile and anonymous, would once again become what it was before, a map, a guide, a story. The undisorder of its folds and the fragility of its fibers would be replaced by order and stability. The goal wasn't the adventure it might promise, but the act of caring for it, of bringing something forgotten back to the light, whole and calm. With the small square of paper resting carefully in the palm of a hand, the surrounding room seemed to come into sharper focus. The room was a place of silence and order. The dark wood bookcase covered an entire wall, filled with books of all sizes. The afternoon light, now more golden, streamed through the window and drew a luminous rectangle on the floor. From outside, you could hear the distant sound of wind passing through the leaves of the trees. It was the perfect setting for a task that would require focus and delicacy. The first step would be to prepare a space. The large wooden table in the center of the room, usually covered with books and papers, needed to be cleared. The small, folded map was placed with extreme care on a little ceramic tray so it wouldn't be lost or damaged further. Then, book by book, paper by paper, the surface of the table was revealed. The dark wood, with its grain and marks of use, emerged like a blank canvas ready to receive the delicate project. A soft cloth was passed over it, removing any trace of dust. The surface became smooth and clean, reflecting the soft light from the window. The stage for the restoration was set. The journey would not be to a distant place, but into the center of that small piece of paper. The challenge was simple and physical: to unfold, to smooth, and to mend so that the past could be clearly read in the present. With the workspace ready, the next step was to gather the necessary tools. These wouldn't be heavy or complex tools, but instruments of precision and care. From a drawer came 2 fine-tipped tweezers, their points delicate, ideal for handling fragile paper without leaving a mark. From another, a set of very soft, bristled brushes, the kind used for watercolor painting, perfect for removing accumulated dust from the creases without harming the paper's fibers. A desk lamp with an articulated arm was positioned nearby, its light ready to be aimed to illuminate the subtlest details. The small, folded map was transferred from the ceramic tray to the center of the clean table. Under the lamplight, its fragility was even more apparent. The edges were worn, and in some places the paper was darker, stained by moisture from some distant time. The immediate challenge was the first fold. To try and force it open would be a mistake. The paper was too dry, almost mineralized by time. It needed patience. With the tip of one of the tweezers, the first layer of paper was lifted with an almost imperceptible slowness, just a millimeter at a time. The sound the paper made was a dry whisper, a silent protest against the movement. It was necessary to pause at every moment, to observe the tension in the fibers, to ensure no tear began to form. Breathing was calm and rhythmic, matching the slow movement of the hand. The first fold revealed a small part of the interior. Nothing was visible yet, only more yellowed paper. The process continued. The second fold was even rigider. This is where the soft brushes came into play. With the finest brush, the dust settled in the crease was swept with light touches, almost like a caress. This released some of the tension, making the paper minimally more flexible. Again, the tweezers were used to lift the edge with the same care as before. With each movement, a small part of what was inside was revealed, but the full picture remained a mystery. It was work of centimeters, not grand gestures. To help keep the open sections in place, a few small, smooth weights were found. A set of polished, heavy river stones served perfectly. As a section was unfolded, a stone was carefully placed upon it, keeping it flat and preventing the paper's memory from making it fold back on itself. The cool, gentle weight of the stone against the old paper created an interesting sensory contrast, the permanence of rock against the fragility of plant fiber. The afternoon's light began to fade, and the desk lamp became the main source of illumination. Its focused glow created a small island of work in the room's growing twilight. The outside world seemed to have disappeared. There was only the table, the paper, and total concentration on the movement of the hands. The scent rising from the map was subtle, a mix of dust, old paper, and a hint of something reminiscent of dry leaves. It was the smell of stored time. After a long period of focused work, almost half of the map was open. It was still impossible to understand what it showed. There were fine lines, drawn with an ink that had once been black, but was now a faded gray. There were also a few letters, but they were upside down or cut off by other folds. The progress was visible and tangible. The small, compact square was now an irregular rectangle, still full of creases, but already revealing its potential. The day's work was done. The river stones remained in place, guarding the progress made, and the lamp was turned off, leaving the map to rest on the dark table, awaiting the next step. The next day began with a new assessment of the map. The paper remained dangerously dry. The remaining folds were the most central and therefore the most stressed. Unfolding them directly, even with the utmost care, carried too great a risk of the paper splitting right down the middle. It was necessary to introduce a little moisture into the environment to relax the old fibers, but in a controlled way, without wetting the paper or causing the faded ink to run. The solution would be to create a small humidification chamber. The search for materials began in the kitchen. A large rectangular metal baking pan was found. It was deep enough to hold a little water without it touching the map. To suspend the paper, 2 small wooden slots were placed across the pan, like a bridge. The map, still with its riverstone weights, would be placed on a sheet of blotting paper, which in turn would rest on a fine screen, ensuring the humid air could circulate on all sides.
With the structure assembled, a little warm water was poured into the bottom of the pan. Steam rose slowly, an almost invisible mist. The map, carefully transferred to the screen over the wooden slots, was suspended a few inches above the water. To close the chamber, a pane of clear glass, taken from an old picture frame, was placed over the pan. Now the process could be observed without being disturbed. The environment inside the makeshift chamber would become saturated with moisture, and the paper's fibers, thirsty after decades of dryness, would slowly absorb it. The waiting began. There was nothing to do but watch and wait. A cup of tea was prepared, its warmth heating the hands, while eyes watched the small greenhouse on the table. Inside the glass, droplets of condensation slowly began to form on the metal walls. It was a sign that the process was working. The paper, once stiff and opaque, began to take on a slight translucency, a sign it was absorbing the moisture from the air. Its edges, once slightly curled upward, began to relax and settle onto the screen. After an hour, the change was noticeable. The paper seemed softer, more pliable. It was time to remove it. With the same delicacy as before, the glass pane was lifted away. The air that escaped the chamber was humid and carried that same smell of old paper, but now intensified, like the scent of a library on a rainy day. The map was lifted out and placed between 2 sheets of dry blotting paper. The river stones were replaced by heavy books, distributed evenly over the surface to ensure a gentle, constant pressure. Now the process was reversed. The moisture that had made the paper flexible needed to be removed slowly,
so that it would dry completely flat, losing the memory of its old folds. The heavy books would ensure it didn't wrinkle or curl as it dried. This was another game of patience. The map would remain pressed there for the rest of the day and through the night. The sun was already setting, staining the sky orange and purple. The room was once again bathed in twilight, but this time the table held not a fragile, partially opened object, but a sandwich of paper and books that held a promise of a smooth surface, of a restored whole. The day's progress wasn't in revealing the map's contents, but in preparing its structure. It was a fundamental step, invisible to the naked eye, but essential for everything that would follow. The house fell silent, and under the weight of the books, the old map slowly forgot what it was like to be folded.
The next morning, the first task was to check the results of the pressing. The heavy books were removed one by one. The top sheet of blotting paper was lifted with care. There lay the map, completely open and surprisingly flat. The most stubborn folds had become thin, discolored lines, like pale scars, but the surface was smooth to the touch. The moisture had been absorbed by the blotting paper, leaving the map dry yet flexible. It could now be handled with much more confidence. With the map fully open, its contents could finally be seen in their entirety, although they were still obscured by a layer of grime and a few small tears at the edges and along the old creases. The next stage was cleaning and mending. The desk lamp was switched on again, and a watchman's loop was brought to the workspace. Through the lens, every square inch of the paper could be examined in detail. The dust was ingrained in the fibers, and the gray ink lines looked fragile. The cleaning process began with the widest, softest bristled brush, with very light strokes, always sweeping from the center to the edges. The loose dust was removed. It was meditative work. The sound of the brush gliding over the paper was almost inaudible. With each pass, the lines and letters on the map grew a little clearer. It was like lifting fog from a landscape. Small mounds of gray dust gathered at the edges of the table, witnesses to decades of being forgotten. After the surface cleaning, it was time to tend to the small tears. For this, a special adhesive was prepared, a thin paste made from rice starch, a traditional method for paper repair that is strong yet reversible. In a small ceramic bowl, a little starch was mixed with distilled water and gently heated until it formed a translucent paste. While the paste cooled, small strips of Japanese paper, very thin and strong, were prepared. The map was turned over with the utmost care, revealing its blank reverse side. Using the tweezers, one of the small tears was perfectly aligned. With the tip of a tiny brush, a minimal amount of the starch paste was applied to the edges of the tear. A small strip of the Japanese paper was placed over the area, like a bandage. With a cotton ball, the patch was gently pressed to remove any air bubbles. The process was repeated for each of the 5 small tears. The Japanese paper, being nearly transparent, would not obscure anything on the other side and would provide a structural support strong enough to keep the tears from growing. The map was then turned back to its front side and left to dry for a while. The starch paste would dry quickly, and the patches would become almost invisible. While waiting, attention turned to the darker stains. There was not much to be done about them without using harsh chemicals, which was out of the question. They were part of the object's history, marks of time that didn't need to be erased, only stabilized. At the end of the process, the map was a new version of itself. It was clean, flat, and whole. The gray lines, though faded, were now clear and uninterrupted. The small handwritten words could be read, even if the script was a little difficult to decipher. The object was saved. The promise made on the first day had been fulfilled. The map was no longer a fragile artifact on the verge of disintegration, but a stable document ready to be read and understood. The physical restoration was complete. The next stage would be interpretation. With the map physically restored, the phase of deciphering could begin. It was carefully positioned under the direct light of the lamp. The watchmaker's loop, once used to find dust and tears, would now serve to examine the lines and words. The map was not of a distant land or an imaginary kingdom. It quickly became clear that it described the surroundings of the house itself and the land around it. It was a local, personal map. The ink, now a pale gray, drew familiar shapes. A large circular shape in the upper left corner was labeled Great Oak. It was unmistakable, the old oak tree that stood at the northern edge of the garden. Another winding line, marked as Creek, corresponded to the small stream that ran at the bottom of the property. A straight double line, identified as Stone Wall, was the old wall separating the grounds from the neighboring woods. They were concrete landmarks, anchors in the real world. The work then became one of transferring this information to a new medium. A sheet of drawing paper, cream-colored and of good weight, was placed beside the old map. With a soft graphite pencil and a ruler, the process of copying began. It wasn't an artistic copy, but a functional transcription. The goal was to create a clear, legible version that could be taken outside without risking the original. First, the main landmarks were drawn: the outline of the property, the great oak, the creek, the stone wall. The scale was approximate, based on the arrangement of the elements on the original map. The sound of the pencil gliding across the paper was pleasant and steady, a counterpoint to the room's silence. Each line drawn on the new paper was a confirmation of what was on the old one. It was a dialogue between the past and the present. After the main landmarks were in place, attention turned to the indicated path. A dotted line started from a point marked Back Door and snaked across the grounds. The line passed to the left of the great oak, ran parallel to the stone wall for a certain distance, and then turned abruptly towards the woods. At the end of the dotted line, there was a small X drawn with a little more force. Next to the X, a single phrase was written in small, careful letters: Cold Frame. Cold Frame. The words evoked images of glass and wood, a place to protect young plants from the cold. There was no known cold frame on the grounds now. If one had existed, it had been swallowed by time, overgrown with vegetation. The map was not a guide to a treasure, but a forgotten piece of gardening, a small project of someone who lived here before. The simplicity of the destination made the journey all the more interesting. It wasn't about what would be found, but about the act of finding itself. With all the information transferred, the new map was complete. It was clean, clear, and practical. Beside it, The original map looked like a ghost, a whisper from the past, but it was a whisper that could now be understood. The old map was then placed in a protective folder, its work as a guide transferred to its younger, more robust successor. It would be kept, no longer forgotten in a book, but as a preserved artifact. The new map was left on the table. The pencil was placed beside it. The work of restoration and interpretation was finished. What remained was the final step, to follow the path. The transition from internal tabletop work to external action was about to happen. The dust, the fragility, the folds, all of it had been overcome. Now it was time to pull on boots and walk. The next morning dawned clear and cool. The air drifting through the open window carried the scent of damp earth and leaves. It was the perfect day for the small expedition. On the table, the new map waited, its graphite lines sharp in the morning light. After a quiet breakfast, it was time to begin. A pair of walking boots was pulled on, and a small pair of pruning shears was slipped into a pocket, just in case the path was overgrown. With the map in hand, the first step was taken outside, through the back door, exactly as indicated by the starting point. The morning sun was gentle and warm on the face. The first landmark, the great oak, was there, as imposing as ever. Its leaves stirred slowly in the breeze. The dotted path on the map indicated passing to its left. The ground there was covered in a layer of dry leaves from the previous autumn, which crunched underfoot with every step. The sound was familiar and comforting. The next landmark was the stone wall. It appeared just past the oak, an old construction covered in velvety green moss in many places. The wall was about 3 feet high and stretched as far as the eye could see, disappearing into the denser vegetation. The map indicated following alongside it. The path here was less clear. The grass was taller, and small wildflowers grew at the base of the stones. The walk was slow and observant. The texture of the moss on the wall, the sound of a bird singing on a nearby branch, the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy of the trees. Every sensory detail was part of the experience. The map in hand was not just a guide, but an invitation to look at familiar surroundings with new eyes, to notice details that would normally go unnoticed. After walking about 50 yards along the wall, the map indicated a sharp turn into a slightly wilder part of the property, where the tended garden gave way to more natural woods. It was exactly as the map predicted. Here, the dotted path became more of a suggestion than a visible trail. Low branches had to be pushed aside, and the pruning shears came in handy to snip a few blackberry canes that blocked the way. The ground became softer, covered by a thick layer of decaying leaves and humus. The smell of the forest was stronger here, earth, rotting wood, and the fresh scent of greenery. The sunlight was dimmer, creating a quieter, shaded atmosphere. The X on the map couldn't be far. The pace slowed, eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary, any structure that didn't belong to the natural disorder of the woods. And then something was seen, a subtle glint, a reflection of light that wasn't natural. It came from a tangle of vines and dense shrubs. Approaching carefully, parting the ivy branches with both hands, the source of the glint was revealed.
It was a pane of glass covered in dirt and leaves, but still intact. Below it, a dark wooden structure, almost the color of the surrounding earth. It was there, the cold frame, the destination marked on the map. It was exactly where the old piece of paper said it would be, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. The cold frame was almost completely camouflaged by nature. Ivy had grown over the glass and wood lid, its tendrils clinging tightly in the crevices. Small shrubs had grown up around it, creating a natural barrier. The work of discovery now became a work of uncovering. With gloved hands, the larger ivy leaves were carefully pulled away. They came loose with a soft tearing sound, revealing more of the structure underneath. The pruning shears were used to cut the thicker ivy stems and the branches of the shrubs that touched the frame. Slowly, the shape of the cold frame began to emerge. It was a rectangular box of dark wood, perhaps 5 feet long by 3 feet wide. The lid, a wooden frame with glass panes, was sloped, designed to catch the most sunlight. The glass, though dirty, had no visible cracks.
After most of the vegetation had been cleared, a moment of contemplation followed. There it was, a small shelter for plants, forgotten perhaps 50 years or more. Who had built it? What young plants had it protected through harsh winters? They were questions without answers, but they filled the silence of the woods with a sense of history and continuity. The cold frame was a tangible link to someone from the past, an anonymous gardener whose care and work could still be seen. A hand passed over the surface of the glass. It was cool and slightly gritty from the accumulated dirt. With the sleeve of a shirt, a small area was wiped clean. Through the clear glass, the inside was visible. It was filled with dark soil and dry leaves that had filtered in through the cracks over the years. There were no plants growing inside, only the rich, dormant earth. There was a small rusted metal handle on the front of the lid. With a little effort, it was gripped and pulled. The hinges at the back protested with a long, rusty groan, a sound that hadn't been heard in a long time. The lid lifted heavy and was propped open on a nearby branch. The air that escaped from within was cool and smelled of deep earth and slow, natural decay. It was the scent of contained time. Sitting on the grass beside the open frame, the only sound was the wind in the trees and the distant song of a bird. There was no hurry to do anything more. The goal of the journey, which began with a dusty book, was reached. The map had served its purpose. The cold frame was rediscovered. The simple act of sitting there, beside it, was the true end of the quest. It was a moment of silent presence, of connection with the place and its hidden history. The sun moved across the sky, and the shadows of the trees danced slowly over the old wood and the clean glass. It was a place of peace, a small corner of forgotten order, now brought back to the light. The sun began to sink in the sky, and the light in the woods grew more golden and diffuse. The time for contemplation came to a natural end. The heavy lid of the cold frame was lowered carefully, and the sound of the rusty hinges echoed one last time before it closed with a soft thud. The cold frame was left as it was, cleared of the overgrowth, but still an integral part of its surroundings. The task of cleaning it out and perhaps using it again would be for another day. For now,
The rediscovery was enough. The way back was taken without the help of the map. The path, now familiar, was easy to follow. The steps were slow, without the anticipation of the journey out, but with the quiet satisfaction of the return. The great oak, the stone wall, the back door, the landmarks were passed in reverse order.
Inside the house, the stillness was welcoming. The air was still and warm. The work table still held the remnants of the restoration journey. The original map, safe in its folder, and the copy left behind before the walk. The new map was placed beside the old. The two, together on the dark wood of the table, told the whole story: the fragile past and the clear present, the mystery and the solution. The desk lamp was switched on not out of necessity, but out of habit, casting a warm circle of light over the two maps. The room darkened slowly around them. There was nothing more to be done. The cycle was complete. A forgotten object had been found, cared for, understood, and followed. A small piece of the past had been brought into the present, not with noise or drama, but with silence, patience, and attention. The final image was this: the two maps side by side, under the soft light, the original with its stains and scars, and the copy with its precise lines. They were witnesses to a day well spent. The room breathed with calm. The work was done. The house was silent, holding the small story of a map folded inside a book. The little music box sat on the topmost shelf of the bookcase, a dark wooden rectangle covered in a fine layer of dust. The silence it held was an ancient one, the kind that belongs to forgotten things. Outside, the rain was falling steadily, a soft, continuous sound that filled the house. The drops tapped against the window panes, each one tracing a brief, winding path before joining the others that trickled down to the sill. Inside the room, the only light came from a floor lamp, which cast a warm, golden circle over a fabric armchair and a small rug. The box was outside this circle of light, almost in the half-light, an object no longer fulfilling its purpose. Maybe this is just another one of those quiet stories made to help you relax. And sometimes that's all we really need. It hadn't played in a very long time. Its small winding key on its underside was still. The lid, with a delicate inlay of a flower, was slightly misaligned, as if it had been closed in a hurry, or perhaps carelessly, the last time. It was a small imbalance, nearly invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the object, but to the one sitting there in that silent room, the box's stillness was noticeable. It was a promise of a melody left unfulfilled. A gaze lingered on it for a moment. The rain continued its rhythm outside, an accompaniment to the silence within. And then the decision arose, simple and clear, without any weight or urgency. It was just a quiet realization. Tonight, it would play again. Rising from the armchair was a slow movement. The air in the room was cool, with the faint scent of old books and the damp earth from outside. Bare feet felt the soft touch of the rug, and then the gentle cool of the wooden floor.
To reach the shelf, a small wooden stool was needed, which creaked softly under the body's weight. With both hands, the box was lifted from its place. It was lighter than it looked, and the dust left a soft smudge on the fingers. There was a sense of fragility about it, a warning to handle it with care. The box was carried to the coffee table, into the circle of lamplight. Now, under the direct illumination, the details became clearer. The dust was gray and fine. There were small scratches in the wood, marks from years of use and of being forgotten. The misaligned lid created a thin line, a dark line that broke the flower's design. The promise of restoring its function, of hearing its music again, brought a sense of quiet purpose to the evening. It wasn't a large or important task, but it was something tangible, something that would begin in disarray and end in harmony.
The first step would be to prepare the workspace. In the kitchen, under the dim light over the counter, a few items were gathered. A soft, clean cotton cloth, and another slightly damp one. A small bowl of warm water, cotton swabs, and a brush with very soft bristles, the kind used for watercolor painting. Everything was placed on a wooden tray and carried back to the living room. The sound of the rain seemed a little stronger now, tapping against the roof in a relaxing cadence. The house was quiet, asleep, and this small project seemed to belong entirely to that moment, to that night. The task wasn't just to fix the box, but to care for it, to return it to a state of balance where the wood was clean, the lid closed properly, and most importantly, the melody could finally be set free. With the music box in the center of the table under the yellowed light, the work began. The first stage was the exterior cleaning. The dry cloth was passed gently over the lid and sides, gathering the loosest layer of dust. The movement was slow, following the grain of the wood. The dust collected on the fabric, revealing a dull, lifeless varnish underneath. The floral inlay, once opaque, began to show a hint of its original colors, an ivory tone for the petals and a pale green for the leaf. The sound of the cloth gliding over the surface was almost inaudible, a whisper that blended with the distant sound of the rain. After the dry cloth came the soft bristled brush. It was used to clean the corners and crevices where the dust was more stubborn. The flexible bristles traced the edges of the lid and the base of the box, dislodging tiny particles of grime that the cloth couldn't reach. Special care was taken around the small brass hinges on the back. They were tarnished and dark, but the brush revealed a golden gleam beneath the oxidation. Every movement was deliberate. There was no rush, the night was long, and the rain outside marked its own time, slow and patient. Next, the cotton cloth was lightly dampened in the bowl of warm water. It was wrung out until almost no water remained, leaving just a cool dampness to the touch. With it, the surface of the box was cleaned once more. The moisture revived the wood, darkening it slightly and causing the scent of old dust to give way to a soft aroma of damp wood. The box already looked different. It looked awake, as if the attention and care were bringing it back from a long slumber. The water in the bowl, once clear, grew cloudy, a visible sign of progress. While the wood air-dried naturally, attention turned to the metal details,
the two hinges and the small clasp on the front of the box. With a cotton swab, the brass surfaces were carefully rubbed. The accumulated grime came away, revealing an aged metal that still held a warm sheen. The clasp, which had seemed a dark gray, now showed its old gold color. It was a meticulous work, demanding focus. The eyes concentrated on the small point of contact between the cotton and the metal, while the rest of the room dissolved into a soft focus background. The sound of the rain on the window was a constant calming presence, a reminder that the world outside was following its course, while in here a small universe was being restored. After being cleaned, the box was left on a dry cloth so that any trace of moisture could completely evaporate. It was a moment of pause, of observation. The wood already had a different appearance. The grain was more defined, and the lamplight reflected more softly on its surface. The flower on the lid seemed sharper. The box was still silent, and the lid was still crooked, but the first visible step of its transformation was complete. The grime of time had been washed away. The object was now prepared for the next stage of its care, the repair of what was broken inside. The simple act of cleaning had already brought a new dignity to the object, a sense that it was being seen and valued once again. The surface of the box was now completely dry to the touch. The next step was to investigate the interior, to discover the reason of the silence and the misaligned lid. For that, the box had to be opened. The lid did not yield easily. It was stuck, perhaps from a jammed hinge or from the wood itself having warped over time. Forcing it was not an option. A way to open it gently had to be found. A thin wooden spatula, the kind used for sculpting clay, was brought from another room. Its tip was flat and smooth, perfect for inserting into the gap without scratching the wood. With extreme care, the tip of the spatula was fitted into the small opening at the front of the box. A very light pressure was applied, moving the tool from side to side. There was a small pop, a dry, low sound, and the lid moved a millimeter. It was a sign that this was the right path. Repeating the movement with patience, the lid gradually loosened until finally it opened completely with a soft groan from the hinges. The inside of the music box was revealed for the first time in many years.
A scent of dust and old metal rose from the open compartment. The inner lining was red velvet, now faded and worn in places. There was a small empty space where perhaps jewelry or other small keepsakes had once been kept. And protected beneath a small glass plate was the heart of the box, the musical mechanism. The brass cylinder with its tiny protruding pins was motionless. Beside it, the steel comb with its teeth of varying lengths waited to be plucked. The glass protecting it was dusty on the inside, which made the view of the mechanism a bit hazy. The first problem to solve was the lid. One of the small brass hinges was slightly bent, causing the lid to not align properly when closed. With a pair of needle-nose pliers, the hinge was held firmly. A gentle, controlled pressure was applied in the opposite direction of the bend. The metal yielded without resistance. A test was performed, closing and opening the lid a few times. The groaning sound diminished, and it now fit perfectly onto the base.
the flower's design once again whole and aligned. The first visible imbalance was corrected. Now attention turned to the mechanism. The small glass plate was held in place by two minuscule screws. With a watchmaker's screwdriver, they were slowly turned. The screws were so small they were placed inside a small bottle cap so they wouldn't get lost. The glass was lifted with the fingertips and set aside on the soft cloth. Without its protection, the mechanism was exposed. Dust had settled between the teeth of the comb and around the cylinder. Using the same soft bristled brush as before, the dust was swept away with light brushes, blowing gently to remove the finest particles. Upon examining the mechanism more closely, the cause of the silence became clear. One of the teeth on the steel comb, one of the longest ones responsible for the lowest notes, was bent slightly downward. It wasn't broken, just out of position. This small imperfection prevented the cylinder from turning freely. When trying to move the cylinder with a finger, it would catch at that exact spot. The source of the problem had been found. It was not a serious defect, but something that would require a steady hand and a precise touch to correct. The rain outside had softened to a light drizzle, and the house seemed even quieter, creating the perfect atmosphere for the concentration the task demanded. The next stage was the most delicate of all, to correct the bent tooth of the steel comb. Any sudden movement could break it, which would make the repair much more complex. The music box was positioned so the lamplight fell directly on the mechanism, illuminating every detail of the cylinder and the comb. The needle nose pliers, the same ones used on the hinge, were wiped with a cloth to ensure no dirt would scratch the metal. The breath grew calmer, slower. All focus was on that tiny point of steel.
The tip of the pliers was carefully positioned at the base of the bent tooth, where it joined the main body of the comb. The idea was not to bend it back from the tip, but to correct the curve from its origin. The hand holding the pliers was steady, braced against the edge of the box for stability. The other hand held the base of the box, keeping it motionless on the table. The metal of the pliers touched the steel of the tooth with a cold, solid contact. For an instant, nothing moved. It was a moment of assessment, of feeling the material's resistance. Then, a minimal, almost imperceptible pressure was applied. The steel offered a slight resistance and then gave way a little. The movement was stopped. The tooth had moved, but it still wasn't perfectly aligned with the others. It needed one more adjustment. The pliers were repositioned slightly higher, and another pressure, equally gentle and controlled, was exerted. This time, there was a tiny sound, an almost inaudible metallic click, as the tooth settled back into its original position, perfectly parallel to its neighbors. A visual inspection confirmed it. The line of teeth was now uniform and continuous. With the main obstacle removed, it was time to tend to the rest of the mechanism. Even though it wasn't broken, years of inactivity could have dried out any original lubrication. In a small desk drawer, there was a vial of fine, clear machine oil used for precision mechanisms. A single drop of oil was placed on a ceramic surface. The tip of a pin was dipped into the drop, collecting a minuscule amount of lubricant, almost invisible to the naked eye. This pinprick of oil was then touched to the mechanism's pivot points, on the cylinder's axle, on the small gears that connected the cylinder to the winding spring.
With each touch, the oil spread, a thin, transparent film that would reduce friction. After lubricating the key points, the cylinder was gently turned with a finger. This time, it moved without any impediment. The movement was smooth, silent, and fluid. The small pins of the cylinder passed under the teeth of the comb without touching them, as the trigger that started the music was not yet released. The heart of the music box was mechanically alive again. The sound of the rain had almost completely ceased. Only the occasional drip from an eave broke the silence outside. The delicate work was done. The pliers and oil were put away. The mechanism, now clean, aligned, and lubricated, gleamed under the light. It was a small machine of sound, a promise of melody contained in brass and steel. The feeling was one of productive stillness, of a problem solved not by force, but by patience and a careful touch. The box was ready to be reassembled, to become a cohesive and functional whole once more. With the internal mechanism repaired, attention returned to the box's external beauty. The initial cleaning had revealed the wood, but it still looked dry and dull. It was time to nourish and protect it. On the table next to the box, a small pot of beeswax and a clean, dry cotton cloth were placed. The pot was opened, releasing a sweet, natural scent that mingled with the air in the room. The wax was solid and yellowish, with a soft texture to the touch. With the fingertips, a small amount of wax was taken from the pot and applied to the lid of the box. Using the cotton cloth, the wax was spread in slow, circular motions. The wood drank in the wax, and its color immediately deepened, taking on a richer, warmer tone. The grain, once pale, now stood out with more definition. The floral inlay seemed to come to life, the ivory of the petals becoming creamier, and the green of the leaf more vibrant. The work continued over all the external surfaces of the box, the sides, the front, the back. Every inch of wood was covered with a thin, even layer of wax. The process was meditative. The sound of the cloth rubbing the wood was rhythmic and soft. The scent of beeswax filled the space around the table. The lamplight reflected on the waxed surface, which began to acquire a satin sheen, a subtle luster that spoke of care, not newness. It was as if the wood's own sap were being restored. After the entire box was waxed, it was set aside for a few minutes so the wood could completely absorb the treatment. During this interval, the small glass plate that covered the mechanism was cleaned. With a soft cloth and a bit of glass cleaner, both sides were polished until not a single smudge or speck of dust remained. The glass became perfectly transparent, like a clear window into the little music machine. The tools used so far were organized and put away. The bowl of water was emptied, and the damp cloth was laid out to dry. The workspace was gradually being tidied, keeping pace with the reassembly of the box. After a few minutes, another clean cloth, this one of flannel, was used to polish the box. The movements were now quicker, yet still gentle, buffing the wax that had dried on the surface. The satin sheen intensified, becoming deeper and more uniform. The wood felt smooth and pleasant to the touch, with a sense of warmth and solidity. The box didn't look new, nor was that the intention. It looked well cared for, a piece that had been valued and preserved. The small marks and scratches of time were still there, but now they seemed part of its history, not signs of neglect. Finally, it was time to close up the box. The glass plate, now crystal clear, was carefully placed back over the mechanism. The two minuscule screws were retrieved from the bottle cap and returned to their places. With the precision screwdriver, they were tightened just enough to secure the glass without excessive force. The mechanism was once again protected, but now visible in all its gleaming detail. The box was almost whole. Only one last final touch was needed to complete the restoration of its interior. It felt as if the scattered pieces of a puzzle were coming together, forming a cohesive and satisfying picture. The last step before testing the music was to restore the comfort of the box's interior. The old red velvet lining was worn and faded. Though clean, it didn't suit the newly cared-for exterior. The decision was made to replace it, giving the inside an appearance as refreshed as the outside. In a box of craft supplies, there was a small scrap of wove felt in a shade of deep green, almost the color of moss. The color was sober and elegant and would pair well with the dark wood and brass of the mechanism. The old red velvet lining was carefully removed. It was only glued at the edges and came away easily, revealing the bare wood at the bottom of the box. The scrap of green felt was placed on the bottom to measure the required size. With a light-colored pencil, the cutting lines were marked on the back of the felt. A pair of sharp scissors, the kind used for fabric, was used to cut the material. The cut was made slowly, following the lines with precision, so the new lining would fit perfectly into the space. The sound of the scissors snipping through the felt was low and muffled. A craft glue, suitable for wood and fabric, was applied in strategic spots on the bottom of the box, just a few thin drops so not to soak the felt. With the fingertips, the felt cutout was positioned over the glue. It was pressed down gently, starting from the center and moving towards the edges to ensure there were no air bubbles. The felt settled perfectly on the bottom, its edges touching the inner walls of the box. The deep green color created a beautiful contrast with the wood, giving the interior a sense of depth and softness. It was a new, clean bed for the music that would soon play. The box was left open for a while so the glue could dry completely. Meanwhile, the small winding key on the base of the box was cleaned with a cloth. It was a butterfly-shaped brass key, and it too was tarnished. After being polished, its golden shine returned, matching the hinges and the clasp. Everything was now in harmony. The polished exterior, the renewed interior, the clean and repaired mechanism. Every part of the box had received attention. When the glue was dry, the box was finally ready. The restoration was complete. The only thing left was to wind it up and listen. Holding the box firmly, the butterfly key was turned. The internal spring offered a soft, growing resistance, a sign that it was storing the necessary energy. The sound of the internal ratchet was a rhythmic, satisfying click. It was wound all the way, careful not to strain the mechanism. An expectant silence settled over the room. The rain had completely stopped, and now the night outside was quiet. The music box, now fully wound, was placed back in the center of the table. The lid was closed. The brass clasp clicked into place, soft and precise. From the outside, it was the same box as before, but transformed. The dust was gone, the shine had returned, the lid was aligned. Inside, the mechanism waited, ready. The promise made at the start of the evening was a breath away from being fulfilled. There was nothing left to do but the final gesture, to open the lid and let the melody fill the silence. The journey of repair had reached its destination. The moment of contemplation was about to begin. The moment had arrived. The room was in complete silence. The only light was still from the lamp, creating an island of calm in the soft darkness of the night. The music box rested on the table, its dark wood reflecting the light with a warm glow. Hands moved slowly towards it. Fingers touched the small brass clasp. For an instant, they remained there, feeling the coolness of the metal. Then, with a gentle motion, the clasp was undone. The lid was lifted. The very moment it opened far enough to release the internal trigger, the music began. The first notes sounded, clear and crisp in the silent room. They were metallic yet sweet, with a purity that only old mechanical things possess. The melody was simple, slow, and a little melancholy, like a forgotten lullaby. Each note was perfectly distinct, without the scrapes or hesitations a damaged mechanism would produce. The repaired steel tooth did its job, playing its low note at the right time, completing the harmony. The gaze turned to the mechanism, now visible through the clean glass. The brass cylinder rotated at a steady, smooth pace. Its tiny pins, gleaming under the light, moved toward the steel comb. Each time a pin met a tooth, it would pluck it and release it, producing a note. It was a mesmerizing mechanical dance, a choreography of precision crafted long ago. To see the movement and hear the sound at the same time was like understanding the soul of the little machine. It was the translation of physical movement into auditory emotion.
The melody continued, repeating its cycle a few times. The sound filled the space without being intrusive. It was a gentle, sonic presence, one that invited contemplation. The mind emptied of other thoughts, focusing only on the sequence of notes as they unfolded. It was a sound that seemed to belong to that night, to that quiet room, to the scent of wax and clean wood. It was the reward for hours of patient, careful work. The imbalance of silence had been replaced by the order of music. As the spring began to lose its tension, the music grew a little slower, the notes spacing out a bit more, as if the box were yawning before returning to sleep. Finally, the last note sounded and dissolved into the air, and the silence returned. But it was a different silence than before. It was not a silence of neglect, but a silence of repose, the space between songs. The lid was closed gently, and the mechanism stopped. The box was lifted from the table. Its weight felt the same, but its essence had changed. It was no longer a forgotten object, but a restored instrument. It was carried back to the bookcase, but not to the topmost shelf. It was placed on a shelf at eye level, a place of prominence, where it could be easily seen and reached. There, among the books, its polished wood stood out. The task was complete. The promise was fulfilled. The evening, which had begun with a small piece of disarray, now ended with a small piece of restored harmony. The music box rested in its new place on the shelf. The lamplight reached its side, highlighting the soft gleam of the waxed wood. The room was quiet again, but the echo of the simple melody seemed to linger in the air, a pleasant, recent memory. The small workspace on the coffee table was clean. The cloths had been put away. The tools were in their cases. Only the faint scent of beeswax remained. A gaze swept across the room. The armchair, the rug, the books on the shelves. Everything was in its proper place, peaceful under the warm light. Outside, the sleeping city was silent. The rain had washed the air clean, and through the window, the distant lights seemed sharper and brighter against the dark sky. A puddle on the windowsill reflected the lamplight, shimmering softly. A step was taken toward the window. A hand touched the cool glass. Breath fogged the surface for a moment before vanishing. Watching the night outside, the quiet of the wet streets brought a feeling of deep calm. The evening's small project was over. A small broken thing had been mended. A small disharmony had been tuned. The lamp was switched off. The room sank into shadow, lit only by the faint light coming through the window. The shapes of the furniture became soft silhouettes. The music box was now just a dark rectangle on the shelf, but its presence was felt differently. It was a presence of potential, of music in waiting. The path to the bedroom was taken in the dark, feet knowing the way. The house breathed in a slow, quiet rhythm. The night had completed its cycle. The rain had come and gone. The work had begun and ended. The silence was broken and then returned, but in a more complete form. There was nothing left to be done. All that was left was to rest, to listen to the quiet. At the end of a street where the asphalt gave way to a small dirt path, there was a wooden bench. It had been there for so long that most people no longer truly saw it. They passed it by as if it were part of the landscape, like a tree or a stone. But the bench was not well. The wood, once smooth and welcoming, was now gray and rough, riddled with small splinters and cracks. One of the slats on the seat was loose at one end, hanging slightly downward. Velvety green moss grew in the crevices and on the bench's feet, where the night's dampness would gather. Maybe this is just another one of those quiet stories, made to help you relax. And sometimes that's all we really need. It was the end of an autumn afternoon. The sun, low in the sky, cast a long golden light over everything. The shadows of the houses stretched across the street. A man was walking slowly, heading home. He always passed by that bench. On that day, for some reason, he stopped. His gaze settled on the loose slat. A gentle wind blew,
and the slat moved a little, making a dry, low sound, a tired little click. It was a small sound, almost imperceptible, but it seemed to break the silence of the street. The bench looked sad, forgotten. A place that had been made for rest now offered only discomfort and neglect. He stood there, motionless, for a full minute. He thought of the times he had seen people sitting there years ago, an elderly couple who read the morning paper, children who used it as a base for their games. Now no one sat there anymore. The bench had lost its function, its purpose. It was just growing old, slowly coming apart. The image of that loose slat swaying in the wind stayed in his mind. It was a small imbalance, a detail out of place that represented all the neglect. In that moment, a simple, clear decision formed. It wasn't a grand thought, but a quiet certainty. Tomorrow, he would take care of that bench. He turned and continued on his way home, but now with a plan taking shape. The promise of transformation was already present. He pictured the bench not as it was, but as it could be, with the wood smooth again, strong, with a warm, vibrant color. A place where someone could sit to watch the sunset or to simply take a deep breath for a moment. The idea of restoring that small piece at the end of the street brought him a sense of calm and purpose. It wasn't an urgent or important task for the world, but it felt right.
By the time he got home, the daylight was already fading. He went into his small workshop at the back of the yard. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil hung in the air. It was a familiar scent of work and patience. He didn't turn on the main light, letting the soft twilight filter in through the window. He looked at his tools hanging on the wall, each in its place: a stiff bristled brush, sandpaper of different grits, a small jar of new screws. He picked up the stiff bristled brush, feeling the weight of the wooden handle and the stiffness of the bristles with his thumb. Then he took a pair of work gloves, thick and worn from use. He placed everything in a canvas box, along with an empty cloth bag. He was preparing for the first step, the cleaning. There was no hurry. The work would begin with the morning sun. He closed the workshop door, feeling the tranquility of the approaching night and the certainty of what he would do the next day. The bench at the end of the street would no longer be forgotten. The morning arrived with a clear, crisp light. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth from the morning dew. After a cup of hot coffee, he picked up the canvas box he had prepared the night before and left the house. The street was silent. Only the sound of his footsteps on the asphalt and the distant song of a bird broke the calm. He walked slowly, feeling the familiar weight of the box in his hand. The sun was still low, and its light created long blue shadows on the ground. When he reached the end of the street, the bench was exactly as he had left it. The morning light revealed the details of its neglect even more starkly. The moss seemed greener, the spider webs in the corners glistened with tiny drops of dew. He placed the canvas box on the ground beside the bench. He opened it and took out the work gloves, pulling them on slowly.
the leather molded to his hands. The first step was a surface cleaning. He took the cloth bag and began to clear away the dry leaves, small twigs and dust that had gathered on the seat and backrest. His hands moved with a calm, methodic rhythm. The leaves made a dry, crisp sound as he gathered them. In a few minutes, most of the loose debris was inside the bag. The bench already looked a little different, as if it could breathe better. Now it was time for the harder work. He picked up the stiff bristled brush. He started at one end of the backrest. He ran the brush over the gray wood. The sound was harsh, a steady scraping. A small cloud of dust and loose wood fibers rose into the air. He worked without rushing, following the grain of the wood. Slowly, the surface layer of grime and weathered wood began to come away. Underneath, a slightly lighter color began to appear, the true color of the wood that had been hidden for years.
He continued, section by section. His arm moved in a steady rhythm, back and forth. It was physical work, but repetitive and meditative. He wasn't thinking of anything in particular. His attention was focused on the sound of the brush, the feeling of the bristles scraping the surface, the gradual transformation before him. The green moss was more stubborn. It clung to the crevices and corners. He used the tip of the brush to pry it loose, piece by piece. The moss came away in small, damp tufts, revealing the dark, stained wood beneath. It had a strong smell of earth and rain. After cleaning the backrest, he moved to the seat. The loose slat shifted under the pressure of the brush, and he worked around it carefully. He cleaned each of the slats, one at a time. Dust gathered around the ground at the feet of the bench. The sun was beginning to climb higher in the sky, and its light was no longer so soft. It warmed his back as he worked. He paused, straightened up, and looked at his progress. Half the bench was now scrubbed clean. The difference was remarkable. The clean part looked lighter, more defined. The dirty part looked heavy and tired. He drank some water from a bottle he had brought and returned to his work. He cleaned the rest of the seat and then the armrests. Finally, he knelt on the ground and scrubbed the feet. This was the most damaged part, where the wood had been in constant contact with the moisture from the soil. The wood there was darker and softer in some spots. He cleaned it as best he could, removing the caked-on dirt and the most stubborn moss. When he finished, the entire bench was free of its surface layer of neglect. He ran his gloved hand over the surface. The wood was still rough, but now it was clean. It was a blank canvas, ready for the next steps. He gathered the dust and bits of moss from the ground with his hands and put them in the bag. He put the brush back in the box. He looked at the bench, now exposed under the morning light. It was bare, showing all its imperfections, its cracks and its stains. But it no longer looked forgotten. It looked as if someone cared about it again. The first step, and perhaps the most important one, was complete. The next day, he returned to the bench. This time, his toolbox was heavier. Inside, there was a screwdriver, a small hammer, and a few containers to hold small parts. The sun was a little higher now, and the light fell directly on the bench, which had dried completely since the previous day's cleaning. The clean wood now clearly showed the work that would be needed. His goal today was to disassemble the parts that needed repair. His attention focused first on the seat. The wooden slats were fastened to the iron frame with screws. He knelt to get a closer look.
The screws were covered in rust. The brownish-orange color contrasted with the gray wood and the dark iron of the frame.
He picked up the screwdriver. He chose the first screw on the most damaged slat, the one that was half loose. He fitted the tip of the screwdriver into the screw's head and tried to turn it. It didn't move. The rust had fused it in place. He applied a little more force, steady and firm. There was a small groan of metal, and the screw began to yield, very slowly. He kept turning, feeling the resistance with every millimeter. Finally, the screw came loose, and he was able to unscrew it all the way. He placed it carefully in one of the containers. He repeated the process for the second screw on the same slat. This one was also stuck, but it came free with a little less effort. With both screws removed, the wooden slat was completely free. He took it in both hands and lifted it away. It was lighter than he expected. He examined it closely. A long crack ran almost from end to end. On one side, the wood was crumbling. This slat couldn't be saved. It would have to be replaced. He set it aside on the grass. He decided to remove all the slats from the seat, wanted to sand and treat them individually. It would be a more thorough job. One by one, with patience, he loosened the screws. Each one had its own resistance, its own story of years under the sun and rain. Some came out with relative ease. Others required more force and persistence. The sound of groaning metal was the only thing that broke the morning silence. As he removed the slats, he lined them up carefully on the grass, in the same order they had been on the bench. He wanted to keep the original order. When all the slats from the seat had been removed, the bench's frame was exposed. It was made of cast iron, with simple, elegant curves. The black paint was peeling in several places, revealing rust underneath, but the frame itself was solid and strong. He ran his hand over the cool metal. It had a gritty texture where the paint had flaked off. He decided the frame would also need attention, but that would be for later. The focus now was the wood. He looked at the slats lined up on the grass. There were 5 in total. 4 of them seemed to be in good condition, despite being worn by time. They just needed to be sanded and treated. The 5th was the cracked one, the one that would have to be remade. He picked up the broken slat and one of the good ones to use as a template. The other 3 could stay there for now. He would come back for them later. Carrying the 2 wooden slats, one in each hand, he began the walk back home. The good slat was solid and had a balanced weight. The broken one was lighter and felt fragile in his hands. As he walked, he thought about the next step, creating a new piece that was exactly like the old one, so it would fit perfectly with the set. The bench at the end of the street was now incomplete, an iron skeleton awaiting its wooden parts to return, renewed and strong. The process of disassembly was complete. Now the work of reconstruction would begin.
He entered his workshop with the 2 wooden slats. He placed them on the workbench, side by side. The light coming through the window illuminated the sawdust motes dancing in the air. The workshop was his sanctuary, a place of silence and concentration. Tools hung on the wall, organized by size and function. There was a comforting smell of wood, metal, and oil. First, he examined the good slat, the one that would serve as a template. He ran his fingers over its surface, feeling the rough texture and the small imperfections. He measured its length, width, and thickness with a tape measure. He jotted the measurements down on a small piece of paper with a carpenter's pencil. He checked the corners, which were slightly rounded by use and time. Then he went to the corner of the workshop where he kept his lumber. There were planks of various types and sizes leaning against the wall. He looked for a piece that had the same thickness and, if possible, the same grain of the original slats. He found a long, solid plank of oak. It was a remnant from an old project. It had the right color and density. He pulled it out and laid it on the workbench. The sound of the heavy wood settling on the bench was a dull, satisfying thud. With the tape measure and pencil, he transferred the measurements from the original slat to the new plank. He drew the lines with care, ensuring they were straight and precise. He checked twice. The carpenter's rule was clear: measure twice, cut once. When he was certain, he secured the plank to the workbench with 2 metal clamps so it wouldn't move during the cut. He picked up a handsaw. The metal blade gleamed in the light. He positioned the blade exactly on the line he had drawn. He took a deep breath and began to saw. The motion was rhythmic and steady, back and forth. The teeth of the saw began to bite the wood, creating a thin groove. The sound of the saw cutting through the wood was the only sound in the workshop. It was a clean, almost musical sound. Fine sawdust, with a fresh, sweet smell, began to fall to the floor, forming a small pile. He kept the cut straight, following the pencil line with total concentration. When the cut was nearly complete, he slowed down to prevent the wood from splintering at the end. The piece came free with a final soft sound. He now had a new slat with the exact dimensions of the old ones, but with the sharp edges and rough surface of a fresh cut. The next step was sanding. He released the piece from the clamps and picked up a sheet of coarse grit sandpaper. He wrapped it around a small wooden block to get a firm and flat surface. He began to sand the new slat, always moving with the grain of the wood. The sound of the sandpaper on the wood was a continuous whisper. Fine dust rose into the air. He sanded the larger surfaces first, the top and bottom, until they were uniform. Then, more carefully, he sanded the sharp edges, rounding them slightly to match the original slat.
After the coarse sandpaper, he moved to a medium grit. The surface of the wood began to feel smoother to the touch. He ran his hand over it from time to time to feel the progress. The texture was changing from rough to satin smooth. Finally, he used a fine grit paper for the final finish. The motion was lighter now. When he finished, the surface of the wood was incredibly smooth. The grain of the oak was now clearly visible, with its unique and beautiful patterns. He placed the new slat next to the old one. They were identical in size and shape, but worlds apart in their condition. One was old, gray, and fragile. The other was new, light, and strong. He felt a deep satisfaction. He had created with his own hands a piece that would replace what time had ruined. The bench was one step closer to being whole again. With the new slat ready, it was time to tend to all the wooden pieces. He went to get the other 3 slats he had left by the bench frame. He brought them to the workshop and lined them up on the workbench next to the new piece and the slat that served as a template. Now he had 5 slats before him, 4 original and 1 newly made. The sanding work he had done on the new piece now needed to be repeated on the old slats. They were worn, but the wood was still good and strong. He began the same process. First, the coarse sandpaper to remove the surface layer of gray, weathered wood. It was slower work than with the new wood, because he needed to be careful not to remove too much material. As he sanded, the true color of the wood began to emerge. The gray gave way to a warm, rich shade of brown. It was as if he were stripping away the years, layer by layer. The smell of the old wood being sanded was different from the new. It was drier, with a hint of dust and history. He worked on each slat with the same attention, ensuring that all the surfaces became clean and uniform. The small splinters vanished, the rough edges were smoothed. After the coarse sandpaper, he used the medium and finally the fine. By the end of the process, all the slats had the same smoothness to the touch. The new piece now blended with the old ones, which looked rejuvenated. They were all ready for the final step of preparation: protection. He cleared all the sawdust from the workbench with a soft brush. Then he lined the surface with old newspapers. He laid the 5 slats on the newspapers with a small space between them. He went to a cabinet and took out a can of linseed oil. He opened it carefully. The scent of the oil filled the workshop. It was a natural smell of nuts and earth. He took a clean, soft cotton cloth. He folded it into a small pad. He dipped a corner of the cloth into the oil and then began to apply it to the first slat. The motion was circular and gentle. The wood, dry and porous after being sanded, drank in the oil immediately. The color transformed before his eyes. The light, warm brown became darker, deeper. The grain of the wood leapt into view with all its details and patterns. It seemed as if the wood was coming to life. He applied the oil to the entire surface of the slat, the top, the bottom, and the sides. Then he moved on to the next slat. The process was slow and repetitive. The only sound was the cloth gliding over the wood. He worked with a quiet concentration, appreciating the transformation he was causing. The new oak slat absorbed the oil in a slightly different way from the old ones, but the final color was very close. The difference was almost imperceptible. When all 5 slats were covered with a generous coat of oil, he stopped. The work was done for now. The oil needed time to penetrate the wood and dry. He looked at the slats, glimmering softly in the light from the window. They looked new, healthy, and strong. He left the slats to dry on the workbench. He cleaned his hands and the tools he had used. While the oil dried, he took the opportunity to do another small task. He took the old, rusty screws and set them aside. He went to a hardware box and chose 10 new stainless steel screws, the same size as the originals. They would not rust. They would hold the slats in place for many, many years. He placed the new screws in a small container, ready for assembly. The day's work in the workshop was coming to an end. Patience was now the main tool. 2 days passed. The oil on the wooden slats had time to dry completely. To the touch, the surface was no longer tacky, but smooth and satiny with a soft sheen. The wood was nourished and protected. The time had come to reassemble the bench. He carried the 5 slats carefully, leaving the workshop for the yard and then the street. The afternoon sun was warm but pleasant. The slats felt heavier, more substantial in his hands. He also carried his toolbox, which now held only a screwdriver and the small container of new, shining screws. The walk to the end of the street was filled with a sense of anticipation. When he arrived, the iron frame of the bench was waiting for him, bare and incomplete. He laid the slats on the grass beside the frame in the correct order. The treated wood, with its rich, deep color, contrasted beautifully with the black iron and the green grass. Before beginning the assembly, he took a dry cloth and wiped down the iron frame, removing any dust or leaves that had fallen on it. Then he took the first slat, the one for the front of the seat. He positioned it over the supports, aligning the holes in the wood with the holes in the iron. It fit perfectly. He took one of the new screws. The metal shined in the sun. He placed it in the first hole and started tightening it with his fingers. Then he used the screwdriver. The screw went into the wood and iron with ease, without the groaning of the old screws. The sound was clean and firm. He tightened it until it was secure, but without forcing it. He repeated the process with the second screw on the same slat. The first piece was now firmly in place. He continued, slat by slat. He would take the next piece, align it, and fasten it with 2 new screws. His work was methodical and precise. With each slat that was added, the bench looked more complete, closer to its original form. The new slat, the one he had made himself, was the fourth to be put in place. It fit without any trouble, as if it had always belonged there. Its color and texture blended so well with the others that it was hard to tell them apart. The work progressed smoothly and without interruption. The sound of the turning screwdriver, the small click as the screw tightened, the feel of the solid wood beneath his hands. Finally, the last slat was set in place, and the last 2 screws were tightened. The seat was complete. He stood up and took a step back to observe his work. The bench was whole again. The new and renewed wood shone under the afternoon sun. The lines of the bench were clean and straight. There were no more loose slats or gray, broken wood. It looked strong, stable, and inviting. He walked over and pushed on the bench with one hand. It didn't wobble. It was solid as a rock. He ran his hand across the entire surface of the seat. It was smooth, continuous, with no splinters. The heat of the sun had warmed the wood slightly. The transformation was complete. The physical work of restoration had come to an end. The bench at the end of the street was no longer a memory of something that was once useful. It was again a place of rest, a simple object, well made and ready to fulfill its purpose. He packed his tools in the box, feeling a deep calm and a quiet satisfaction. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was growing cooler. The work was finished, but he didn't go home right away. He wanted to stay there for a moment. He set his toolbox on the grass beside the bench and simply stood there looking at it. The restored bench seemed to belong in that spot more than ever. Its warm color complemented the green of the grass and the brown of the dirt path. It didn't look new in an artificial way. It looked well cared for, respected. It had the dignity of its age, but with a renewed strength. The long afternoon shadows stretched across the street, and the bench's shadow was now crisp and whole. After a few minutes of silent contemplation, he decided to do something no one had done in a long time. He sat down on the bench. He did so slowly. He felt the weight of his body settle onto the solid wood. The surface was firm and smooth beneath him. There was no creak, no unsteady movement. The bench was secure. The backrest supported his back at a comfortable angle, It was a good bench. From there, seated, the perspective of the street was different. It was lower, slower. He saw his own house further up the street, its windows reflecting the evening light. He heard the neighborhood sounds beginning to quiet down at the end of the day. A closing door, the distant laughter of a child, a bark of a dog. They were familiar sounds, but from that position they seemed clearer, more present. He remained seated, doing nothing, just breathing and observing. The bench wasn't just an object he had repaired. It was now a point of observation, a place to be present. The effort of the past few days, the cleaning, the disassembly, the cutting, the sanding, and the reassembly, all culminated in this simple moment. The bench's purpose was being fulfilled. It was offering rest. He thought about the flow of the work, how each step was necessary, how patience had been more important than strength. The satisfaction he felt wasn't of pride, but of harmony, of seeing something broken and making it whole again, of having restored a small part of his world. An elderly neighbor, walking her small dog, passed him. She stopped for a moment, looked at the bench and then at him. A small smile formed on her face. "It looks very nice," she said, her voice soft. "I haven't sat there in years." He just nodded, smiling too. The woman continued on her way. Her simple observation was a quiet acknowledgement of the work he had done. The bench was no longer invisible. People were seeing it again. He sat there until the sun had completely disappeared behind the hills. The sky darkened to a deep blue. The first stars began to appear. The bench, once a symbol of neglect, was now a place of peace in the twilight. It was a place to simply be. The streetlights began to turn on one by one, with a low hum, followed by a soft flare of light. The yellowish light from the nearest lamppost fell on the bench, creating a warm circle of light in the calm of the approaching night. The world had grown quieter. He decided it was time to go home. He stood up slowly, feeling his muscles a little tired of the day. He picked up his toolbox. Before turning to leave, he gave the bench one last look. Under the lamplight, the wood looked even richer and darker. His work was complete. The bench was there, solid and empty, waiting. It no longer needed him. His part in the bench's story was finished. Now the bench would belong to whoever passed by and needed a moment of pause. It belonged to the street, to the night, to the days to come. He began to walk slowly back home. The sound of his footsteps was the only sound on the now silent street. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The image of the restored bench resting peacefully under the light was etched in his mind. When he got home, he put his tools back in their proper places in the workshop. Each tool had served its purpose. He washed his hands, feeling the texture of the soap and the warmth of the water, the feeling of the day's work leaving his skin. From his kitchen window, he could see in the distance the small point of light at the end of the street where the bench sat. It was a small but constant presence, a small anchor of order and care in his small world. He sat down at his table in the quiet of his home. There was nothing more to be done that day. The task he had set for himself was complete. A feeling of deep, simple peace settled over him. The cycle was complete. The imbalance had been corrected. The bench at the end of the street
was once again doing what benches do best, waiting in silence, offering a place to rest for anyone who might need it. And that was enough.